There is a new COVID-related update that you should probably be made aware of. Although I will preface this by saying that if you are like me, you have pretty much checked out of the COVID news cycle. You're probably not keeping up with any of the different COVID mutations and COVID variants that are floating around out there. For myself, I basically stopped keeping track of them since the year 2023 with the Arcturus variant. However, having said that, the virus is still out there. It's still mutating, and you do still have scientists and organizations tracking and labeling each new variation. And so, right along that line, we had the World Health Organization, the WHO, they recently came out and they said that a new COVID variant known as NB.1.8.1 is causing more infections worldwide. And just for your general reference, in case you forgot all about it, which most people have again, the naming convention for these types of viruses follows a sort of branching diagram pattern. You can see it up on your screen, with every letter and every dot representing a different variation and a different mutation of the original virus. And so NB.1.8.1 is a 6th generation sub-branch of the Omicron XDV variant. And in regards to this NB.1.8.1 variant specifically, here's what the WHO wrote in their statement, quote, "Since mid-February 2025, according to data available from Sentinel sites, global SARS-CoV-2 activity has been increasing with the test positivity rate reaching 11%, levels that have not been observed since July of 2024. This rise is primarily observed in countries in the Eastern Mediterranean, Southeast Asia, and Western Pacific regions. Since early 2025, global SARS-CoV-2 variant trends have slightly shifted. Circulation of LP81, which is a previous variant, has been declining, and reporting of NB.1.8.1, a variant under monitoring, or a VUM, is increasing, reaching 10.7% of global sequences reported as of mid-May." Meaning that as of last month, as of the middle of last month, this HB.1.8.1 is one of these specific variants that the WHO is keeping their eyes on. Then, in regards to vaccinations, well, the WHO went on to say that vaccination levels, meaning people getting the booster shot, are low across the board. Quote, "From the latest available global data covering the period between January 1st and September 30th of 2024, overall COVID-19 vaccine uptake among high-risk groups remains low, with significant disparities across regions and income levels. Among older adults, just 1.68% were reported as having received a dose so far in 2024 up to September 30th, 2024, across 75 reporting member states. Uptake was notably higher in the region of the Americas and the European region, with older adult coverage reaching 5.1% in the European region and 3.6% in the region of the Americas." Regardless, this newly spreading variant of COVID, while not making waves here in the US, is apparently having a large impact over in China. For starters, the Chinese equivalent of our CDC, they came out and they said that this new NB.1.8.1 variant makes up the majority of cases in China right now, with some Chinese doctors going on the record within their state-run media to say that one symptom that's common with this new particular variant is a sharp, painful sore throat. Now, the numbers themselves that the Chinese CDC reports, well, they're probably made up, and we'll get to that in a moment. But the very fact that they had to report a 200% increase month over month is a telling sign of a real trend. They weren't able to hide that. Furthermore, there are some, you can say, anecdotal data points that we can collect and then connect to get an idea of what the situation actually looks like in China on the ground. For instance, the Chinese edition of the Epoch Times, which by the way has very deep inroads into mainland China because it's one of the only uncensored news sources there, well, there were several whistleblowers that reached out to the Chinese edition, and here's what they're saying. Quote, "Doctors and residents across China continue to report more infections and deaths as the latest wave of COVID-19 continues, portraying a far more severe situation than the Chinese regime is letting on. Schools in various provinces are reportedly suspending classes and placing students in quarantine, leading to growing concerns among the public of a return of lockdowns." Then here were a few examples of the school closures and school isolation notices happening throughout China. And as I read this to you, do just notice the different names of the cities and provinces. I'll explain why that's significant in a second. Quote, A home quarantine notice issued by a primary school in Guangzhou said that a third-grade student was ordered to undergo quarantine for 7 days after being diagnosed with COVID-19. After the quarantine period, health certificates from a clinic and community health service agency were required for the student to return to school. Schools in Shaanxi and Jiangsu also suspended classes after some students exhibited fevers which were suspected to be COVID-19 infections. And as I alluded to, the relevant piece of information in that paragraph is the fact that the city of Guangzhou and the provinces of Shaanxi and Jiangsu are not located near each other at all. One is located in the south, the other one in the north, and then the third one is on the eastern part of the country. It would be equivalent to, if this were here in the US, schools being shut down in Austin, Texas, another school being shut down in Chicago, and then another school being shut down in New York City, which would indicate that this new wave of COVID cases is not just happening here or there, it's actually happening throughout the entirety of the country. Furthermore, included among what the physician whistleblowers were telling the Chinese edition of the Epoch Times is that, for one, patients were coming in with the white lung symptoms, which are often associated with COVID cases, and that secondly, patients across the entirety of the country were actually specifically not being tested for COVID because, quote, hospitals in China had not conducted large-scale nucleic acid testing for a long time because it was worried about causing social panic. And then furthermore, to also avoid this social panic, doctors were allegedly being told by their local health bureaus that they do not need to report confirmed COVID cases, again, to avoid social panic. And the social panic issue that they're referring to has to do with, of course, the fear of COVID itself coming back, but also with the fear of a possible return of the zero COVID policy. All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment, I'd like to introduce our sponsor and my own personal gold dealer, American Hartford Gold. Now, as soon as the latest round of tariffs hit, almost immediately, the stock market hit some serious waves, we could say. It became super turbulent, very volatile, and of course, these conditions don't just affect Wall Street, they affect all of us with our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I want to introduce a company that I trust and I use myself to help secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move their assets into something tangible, something you can actually hold, physical gold and physical silver. Two precious metals that help me sleep better at night, knowing that I have a hedge against all those brilliant decisions being made over in Washington. Now, they have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau, they have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your doorstep, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive buy one, get one deal for my viewers. When you call them and mention my name, Roman, for every 1 ounce of gold that you purchase, you can get 1 ounce of free silver. And so take advantage of this special offer. Either call 866-242-2352 or simply text Roman to 65532. That's again, 866-242-2352 or text Roman to 65532. I'll also throw their information. It'll be down in the description box below. If you remember, the zero COVID policy of China were those draconian level restrictions that were imposed on the Chinese citizens in cities across the whole country. The policies there made what happened in New York, Australia, and Europe look like walks in the park. In China, you had authorities literally go so far as to weld people's doors shut so they literally could not leave their home. Or you had some other places that would post guards at exits of apartment buildings so that, again, people could not leave. It was a full display of what big government can do in a completely communist one-party dictatorship system. However, right now things are a bit different. The central government of China, they're not as keen to return to such restrictions because the trade war with the US has China on the back foot. And that is actually exactly the point that Dr. John Leo, he's a professor over at Canada Public College, and he made it during an interview with the Epoch Times. Quote, following the continuing strategy of concealment, the Chinese regime does not want to shut down the cities or implement the zero COVID policy at the moment because that will seriously affect its economic development. Now, stimulating economic development is the regime's top priority. Now, that would make sense given that there was much reporting over the last month, showing that the tariffs that Trump imposed on China had the effect of slowing down factories, or sometimes even having factories completely stop operations. And along that line, the Chinese language edition of the Epoch Times, they just reported earlier this year that according to their inside sources within the country, well, the government is doing everything they can to hide the scale of the COVID outbreak, such as by doing this. Quote, "Local governments were building large-scale mobile cabin hospitals to quarantine patients with respiratory infections, including COVID-19, such as in Urumqi in the Xinjiang region and in several provinces." And of course, the benefit to the regime of setting up these types of quarantine camps in Urumqi, as well as in the Xinjiang region more broadly, is that that region is sparsely populated, so you can fit a lot of people there without raising many eyebrows. Now, the reason that this all matters to us here in the United States of America is kind of obvious. I mean, these viruses, they don't know borders. It was only 5 years ago that the outbreak in Wuhan, well, it expanded and wound up shutting down the entire world. And the unique problem that China presents is that because they don't transparently share their data and what's happening inside their borders, it's hard for people who are actually tracking these sort of branching virus mutations to be able to do so effectively, which was a point made by Dr. Sean Lin, who was a microbiologist with the US Army, and he said to us the following during an interview, quote, "The people do not know the real situation and the severity of the wave of outbreak, especially the severity rate and the mortality rate. The authorities don't tell the people. China's situation is more complicated and severe because it involves multiple respiratory pathogens co-circulating and co-infections with 3 or 4 respiratory pathogens infecting at the same time, not just this NB.1.8.1 strain. But the officials have not revealed the real situation, so I think it is difficult for the international community to understand. Because the Chinese regime does not reveal the true data, it's not possible to track virus spreading routes. This also brings about a greater danger. China often covers up many things until they can no longer be covered up. When they come out, the situation is already quite serious and may be out of control. This is actually the biggest concern." And that is indeed the crux of the issue. This new strain that's spreading inside of China, which, by the way, I will mention has already been detected in many other countries around the world, in Australia, and also here in America. But this new strain doesn't seem to be that bad. It appears to be more capable of evading people's immune system, but it doesn't appear to be more deadly than previous strains. That's borne out by both the data coming out of the WHO, as well as the anecdotal data that we here at the Epoch Times have been getting from our sources inside of communist China. However, it only takes one unexpected mutation, and then who knows what can happen. I mean, that new mutation, it might suddenly be many times more infectious and for some reason many times more deadly than the original virus, and then plunge the whole world once again into a global pandemic. And the problem was in 2020, just as it is now in 2025, that the communist regime of China is not transparent. They aren't willing to share the real data. They're not telling people what's actually going on in the country. No one knows what the real situation is. And so everyone, which includes, of course, the people inside of China themselves, they and we are all left to guess what's really happening until it's too late. And as just one example of many, according to the Chinese CDC, in the month of March, meaning March 2025, 7 people across all of China died from COVID-19. However, compare that to Canada, a country that has 3% of China's population, as well as one of the best sanitation systems in the whole world. But Canada, during that same period, they reported roughly 200 COVID deaths per month. And so that is just one example of many showing how the data coming out of China's equivalent to our CDC is completely unrealistic. And so I guess here's just hoping that some monster strain of COVID doesn't mutate in that darkness that we call communist China and then wind up spreading across the entirety of the world. If you'd like to read more about this new strain, or more importantly, if you'd like to read the entirety of our report that came together from all these different whistleblowers inside of China, I'll throw the link to that report. You'll be able to find it down in the description box below, which is that same description box I should mention right below those like and subscribe buttons, both of which I hope you take a quick moment to smash so that this information can reach ever more people via the YouTube algorithm. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.